it is the job of our generation to recognize all the ways we're sliding backwards. In 2013, the John Roberts-led, obviously corporatist Supreme Court began chipping away at the Voting Rights Act. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her dissent, said she likened it to being in a rainstorm. But you're not getting wet because the umbrella's working. So she said, so now we're going to take down the umbrella because we're not getting wet. And she said, we will certainly get wet again once you take down the umbrella. And that's exactly what happened. Because as soon as they began chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, behold, all these voter suppression efforts that are active throughout the country, obviously aimed at people of color and disenfranchised communities. That means we're sliding backwards. Mass incarceration means we're sliding backwards. Obvious racial disparity in our criminal sentencing and our criminal justice system obviously means we're sliding backwards. Now, as Abraham Lincoln said, we need to confess our national sins. We need to look at what in recovery is called our character defects. America has two main character defects. One has been with us from the beginning. One actually is relatively new. It's really only become this festering wound since the end of World War II. One is racism, and one is militarism. Now, with racism is inherent in this profoundly tragic dichotomy, this ironic dichotomy, which is in our cultural DNA. On one hand, in 1776, the most extraordinary principles were infused into the founding documents of our country, the Declaration of Independence, repudiating, overthrowing the status quo of aristocracy at that time, saying that this country would not belong to just a few people who were entitled to land, to education, to wealth, and so forth, but rather that in this country, all men would be seen as created equal, that all men would be seen to have been given by God inalienable rights of life and of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. 41 of the men who signed that document were themselves slave owners. This is baked into the cake. This is the national tension that has been with us from the beginning, as generation after generation has been filled, both by those whose hearts are ablaze with the possibilities inherent in a society dedicated to the equality of opportunity, and also those whose basic attitude has been, no, we will not be doing that. But the historical narrative of America is that we tend to get it right ultimately. That is why slavery was followed by abolition. And even the genocide and cultural annihilation of Native Americans has been followed even now by a rising tide of consciousness, by people standing at Standing Rock, by a conversation about giving back the Black Hills of South Dakota to the Sioux, as they were promised in 1863, in a spate of lawsuits by which treaties that were usually not even negotiated fairly to begin with were then broken by the United States government. And there are more and more people, during the Obama administration, a suit that was settled for $83 million and so forth. The oppression of women was ultimately followed by two major waves of feminism and the suffragette movement. And of course, as we've already discussed, institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South was followed by the civil rights movement. It was one generation's job to abolish slavery. It is our generation's job to abolish racism. It is our time in our society, not just on the issue of race, but on the issue of so many things, to look at our deep character defects, to look at the places where we need to atone.